All right. I'll give you 30 seconds to calm down. So let me say a few housekeeping things while people get seated. Those of you who were at our conference 2 years ago remember that we were in a nice, spacious auditorium over at Teachers College, but the biggest complaint was that people could not eat or drink at the plenary sessions. So we're here now, despite the double-wide column. So if your sight lines are challenged, take a sip of coffee or eat a piece of pastry and say, if I could see better, I wouldn't be able to drink this coffee. We do have some coffee over there, so please take advantage of that. And the restrooms are outside. We are tweeting, so Georgia is in charge of that. If there's something sensitive you'd like not to be tweeted, I guess you can talk to her about it. And if you want to tweet, it's hashtag NCPR 2012. So there we are. Let me start. I'm Tom Bailey. I'm the director of the National Center for Post-Secondary Research, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But I want to start out by introducing our president, Dr. Susan Fuhrman. Dr. Fuhrman has been the president of Teachers College for the last 6 years. Before that, she was the dean of the Ed School at University of Pennsylvania. And she was the founder of and director of the Consortium for Policy Research and Education, better known as CIPRE. It's also, her PhD is from Teachers College, so it's nice to have one of our own. She's certainly an acknowledged national leader in education, and we're proud to have her as our president. I just want to say something personal. We're operating a research center inside a university, and as many of you know, there's some wonderful things about that, but at the same time, there's also some serious disadvantages as well, but an encouragement from the leadership of the college. And I hope that the work that we've done at NCPR and at CCRC in the last few years has contributed something to education. And if it has, Susan deserves a lot of credit for that by establishing an environment of supportive and helpful environment that's allowed us to focus on the substantive issues that are of concern to us and not be distracted by other kinds of things. So for that, I thank you very much. Dr. Fuhrman.
So welcome to Teachers College. Thank you, Tom, for that introduction and your appreciation of the supportive environment and your hint that we would do better if we allowed coffee in Cowan Auditorium. I'll take that, take that back and ponder it. So thank you and your whole team for putting together this wonderful conference, and I want to also thank all the collaborators in the research and the funders and all the various practitioners and others who benefit from this work and participate in it. It's just wonderful to have you here. I think the theme of developmental education is it's interesting how it reflects TC's current priorities. We're working on 3 themes that are guiding us as we go forward into our next 125 years. We're celebrating our first in 2013, our first 125, that is. And as we think about as a major capital campaign. So one theme has to do with learning, and can we be more conscious of learning in instruction? Can we prepare instructors, teachers, and K-12 prospective faculty to think about learning and to assess it as they teach, and to be more cognizant of the findings from cognitive and neuroscience research? Can we build curricula that acknowledges all that? And certainly developmental education is fundamentally about learning and the progress students make as they learn. Second theme has to do with the whole child or a whole adult. So it's not just instruction, as important as that is, but it's also all the other supports that enable learning. And we're making that real in the Harlem community, where we established a public school, and we have a set of partnership schools that are the focus of an integrated service model involving all Columbia University eventually, we hope. So social work, medicine, Mailman, School of Public Health. Our theory is we can do that kind of integrated service model more cost effectively when we pay partially in credits, not just in cash, for involving all these practitioners to be. Certainly that applies also when it comes to post-secondary level, supports for the whole person, the whole learner, as well as instruction. And then a third theme is a policy and organizational system that supports those other goals. And this year we've opened our Educational Policy and Social Analysis Department, of which Tom and Judy and others here are members, that tries to bring together policy researchers across disciplines, economics, sociology, et cetera, and cross-sector. And this is where we're really unique, where we have amazing strength from early childhood to K-12 to community colleges to post-secondary to adult education. And we are trying to capitalize on that enormous strength by preparing policy researchers who understand the articulation needs across sectors, and certainly developmental education is a central example of an area that would benefit from that cross-sectoral understanding. So this is a perfect conference for TC, and we're so happy to have you here. And we're also so happy to have this morning's speaker, Undersecretary of Education Martha Kanter, who we are happy to have on campus on all occasions. She was just here last month to speak at one of our master's convocation ceremonies. She inspired our graduates, encouraging them, in her words, to put lie to the myth that poverty is destiny and create opportunities to help the too many students we're losing before graduation. And this has been the heart of Martha's work. I think you all know about her distinguished career. She was nominated by President Obama on April 29, 2009 to be Undersecretary, and was confirmed on June 19th. I think that's kind of a record for recent years. She was the first community college president and district leader ever to serve in the Undersecretary role. She's currently spearheading the President's initiative to restore the United States to leadership in college enrollment, and the President has charged Martha with planning and implementation responsibilities to have the best educated, most competitive workforce in the world by 2020, as measured by the proportion of college graduates over the next decade. Before her appointment, and then Chancellor of the Foothill Deanne District, one of the largest in the nation, she's been Vice Chancellor for Policy and Research for the California Community College's Chancellor's Office, Vice President of Instruction Services for San Jose City College, and was an alternative high school teacher in Massachusetts and New York. She is not a TC alum. She actually has a degree from that other place up the coast, but we're looking forward to Martha claiming TC as her alma mater. She's here often enough. So let's welcome Undersecretary Martha Kanter.
Can you all see me? Maybe I'll take this off so I can hold it. This often happens to me. It happened actually at the White House, where we had five of us were asked to summarize 5 different conversations. And when we walked into the South Court auditorium, which many of you have been in, I looked over and I saw this podium that was way too high. And I thought, okay, this is going to be an evening of Margaret Thatcher. You know, I remember the hat, and you can only see the little tiny face. And so it was my turn to give, a few minutes, and I actually stood up on my tiptoes the whole time like this. And what happened the next morning, I started getting emails from all over the country. Did you see Jay Leno? Did you see Jay Leno? And I said, no, what was it? Well, they did a skit that night on Get That Woman a Stool. Can't the... And I walked in I walked into the office, and I mean, the young people, when you start in an administration, all these young people come in who have worked on the campaign, and David Longenecker, who was our assistant secretary, knows this very well in the Clinton administration, and they have tremendous energy, and everybody was silent, and they thought I was going to come in and really just be angry and frustrated. I thought it was hilarious. And actually, one of the student newspapers in one of the community colleges showed the side view of on my tippy toes. So anyway, this, I think, is a very appropriate podium, and we have very appropriate coffee and snacks for everyone. But you're all here to talk about the importance of developmental education in America. And so I was really very thrilled that Tom Bailey invited me to come, and want to thank Susan Fuhrman, who is one of the national leaders, among the very best national leaders in the whole conversation about teacher preparation, the role and responsibility of the Research One universities to really help guide what we do. So you're in a perfect place to talk about research and practice. And that's what we're really wanting to do at the federal level. So I want to thank you for bringing us all together, Tom. And also for so many years through the Community College Research Center of giving us some grounding in the research that will say to the country, we need an evidence base to really move forward. And we've got a lot of great ideas. There's a lot of experimentation. I'm just going to put this over here so I can have some space. A lot of experimentation. But if you look at the investment in research historically, in education research specifically, it has not been at a par with other research investments historically in this country. So I think what we need to do is really put a lot of pressure to show the evidence that you all are working on. You're all experimenting, you're all having results, you're all sharing results, and places like the NCPR Center is going to galvanize what you're doing and be able to showcase, in the post-secondary arena, what is happening in developmental education and why we need better research applied to practice. And we just historically have been lacking. So we need a lot more people to start really being, I think, very strong spokespeople for what this is about and why it matters. Now, when I came on board in that first year, President Obama, actually in February, sort of posited an aspirational goal, which was by 2020, how could we get to a point, and I think as Susan said, to have the best educated, most competitive workforce in the world, and what would it take when you in community colleges, I was president for 16 years, a faculty member for many, many years before that, the large numbers of underprepared students coming in the door. And I'm reminded by a conversation I had recently with Eduardo Padron, and he said, you're immersed in metrics and trying to keep things simple and help parents and students and families choose good schools to go to. And you look at every data set David Longenecker and I have looked at now for many, many years, it's all across the board. Graduation rates, repayment rates, earnings after high school, surveys that you get, all the metrics that you're involved in your institutions. If you compare institution across the board, if you compare states across the board, you see tremendous variation. You see some schools, I'm going to be there tomorrow, Metropolitan State University, they've closed an achievement gap. They don't have an achievement gap between black and white students in terms of academic performance. They've got students moving through, they've got a long way to go, but they have closed that gap. And you look next door at another institution and they have one of the widest achievement gaps you've seen in this country. So we've got this tremendous variation, and I think, at the federal level, what we're really interested in is understanding models that are dynamic, that can help higher education institutions, community colleges specifically, grow and do better and improve over time. And if we see stagnation, and when I go around and I see institutions that have had very low, wide achievement gaps and very low performance or metrics or outcomes, whatever you want to call it, we get very worried. Why have we allowed this to happen when at the heart of what we need is really a world-class curriculum that is going to take any student from where they start? And that's Eduardo Padron's big complaint. Martha, if you don't create a system where we know where students are starting from, how can you take a system and show what the graduation rates and everything else are. And we know, the good news is we're adding part-time and transfer students. The bad news is students start at very many different places in this country, partly coming from K-12, partly because they're from communities where they've spoken a second language for many, many years, and they haven't acquired literacy, the language skills that we need in this country. All kinds of reasons. They may have been a single parent. They may have had a little bit of college or dropped out of high school. So we've got tremendous variation on the input side. And we want consistency on the output side. And I really think that's a huge problem for the country. And we need your best ideas to say, how could we construct what I go back to, I'm not actually doing my speech here, go back to and construct a continuous improvement model that will take students from where they are, identify the best curriculum, and I think if there's any message in talking with Ed Moranti, who I've known for many years, who's here in the audience, saying, the issue for us is we don't have a world-class curriculum that's being applied with the best pedagogy in every institution across the country today. We just don't have that. We've got old methods of teaching. We've got, sage on the stage. If you look at most classes, and we've got a leveled system in developmental ed. Some institutions, 6 levels of developmental ed. I mean, you're never going to get out with that kind of a model. Many of the newer models modularize, take students where they are, don't give them what they already know, use branching, use analytics, use the learning sciences research, and help them move from where they are to a much higher level of performance. So, that's the challenge in front of us. And what do we do at the federal level? Well, in the first year, when the president and Dr. Jill Biden convened the first ever community college summit, they brought together scholars and practitioners from around the country to say, what do we need to do differently in a lot of different areas, but developmental education was one centerpiece of that work. They produced a report. You can go back to that. It's on the White House website to see what the country thought. And the country thought developmental education is going to be critical. We need to do things differently with high schools, but we need to even start earlier. And frankly, when I look at the pipeline to higher education, and I look at the fact that 1/3 of children are not ready for kindergarten, and then when I went to a conference and the head of the Modern Language Association stood up and said to everyone, do you know that 4th grade reading scores have stayed stagnant for 40 years, and we haven't moved the needle on the percentage of people that aren't at 4th grade reading at 4th grade. And then when we look up to the high school level, and we see that only 75% of students are getting a high school diploma, and in many, many parts of the country, 50% not graduating, 30% not graduating from high school. So we have today, and this is sort of I feel like it's our generation's fault, my generation's fault. We have 93, I was telling Susan Fuhrman this morning at breakfast, 93 million adults that are at the low skill level on the ABE test. If you look at the ABE, those kinds of results, adult basic education, 93 million adults, that's 45% of the adult population. So why are we surprised when we see the kinds of decisions we make as a country and we have as much variation? So you're the brain trust. You're the people that can say, we're not going to do this for the next generation, and we're going to reform what we're doing in developmental education by understanding where are the highest impact curricula that we can apply, having the research that Tom Bailey and Tom Brock's here, I saw, and so many other people, Tani Breik and others, are writing about developmental education, but more than writing, they're testing strategies and theories that you all are invested in and are working very hard to implement. And what we want to do is bubble up the best of those to share them with the country. And I would say, looking back over what the Department of Education, I think, is 33 years old, something like that, we have not done enough to shine a spotlight on what's working and replicate and scale what works. So what may work at Broward Community College over here may not exactly fit with, Palm Beach State Community College over there. But what we want to do is identify those high impact practices and share them and have you really take a look at them and see whether they're worth adopting. Now, one thing that, as I travel around the country, that I'm seeing is, a lot more modularization of the curriculum, and I think that's a really good thing. That I think community colleges are seeing that, 6 levels of developmental education that take 3 years to get through is really not going to be a strategy that's really going to help students graduate. And, I'm sitting on the other end saying, how can we lift the country from 40% of people with certificates and degrees, 2-year and 4-year degrees, to 60%? And how long is that going to take? And actually, we're going to be issuing a state-by-state analysis sometime this summer, as soon as we get it done, on which states are making progress and why, and what are the practices they have put into place at the institutions to show that there is tremendous momentum toward graduation, even at a time when the recession has devastating higher education. And frankly, you'll hear the President and Secretary Duncan and all of us talking about what can we do strategically to take whatever federal investments we have and use them as an incentive to build back the public's trust in higher education and the state's investment, especially in the public sector, but also the private sector is suffering. I mean, the states, many of the states, over 80% of states have reduced funding for American higher education over the last few years, and that has to stop. And people say, well, how can it stop? We don't have the money, this and that. And I say, look at the investments states have made, and look at the growth in prisons and corrections over the last 30 years. And that's what we've invested in large measure. And can't we do something differently to reinvest in what will prevent us building any more prisons in this country? So I think it's our fault. I mean, you can clap, but this is what we have invested in. And we've got to invest in people that have a lot of talent that have not participated for all kinds of reasons. So I think, what you're doing is really important. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are happening. I think you're all a very educated group, so you all know that, more than 60% of jobs are going to require degrees beyond high school. I think you're all sophisticated, you're a very sophisticated group here to know that the controversy isn't about education or training, that President Obama has made it very clear since the get-go that all Americans should at least have 1 year beyond high school of advanced education, in training or education or both, and that we need the pipeline from K-12 and from communities around the country to be more highly educated, which means we want students, if they want to become an electrician, that's fantastic, but when the trade unions come to me and say, and the steel workers burn out at the age of 40, they've broken their backs in construction management and they're not ready for something else, we've got to do both. We've got to give students the jobs they need today, but the opportunity to continue on and become what you all call lifelong learners. And we hope that more students will get college degrees. We've got to have, and you all know what the statistics are in the community colleges, we've got to get more students moving through. So, when I look at McKinsey studies and all kinds of studies around the country about, what are the biggest things we could do to both increase our productivity and move us toward the president's goal, it's really sort of 2 pieces. One is do everything we can to reinvent remediation, to modernize remediation, to modularize it, to modernize it, to create those high-impact practices that you all are going to share at this conference. And on the other side, reduce time to earning degrees and certificates. Use technology, understand that learning is taking place everywhere. Use the learning sciences research, use the analytics, go out to Khan Academy, go to Udacity, look at how all the technology is delivering education differently. And, a lot of work, and this gets back to Teachers College and why we're here, a lot of work to reinventing the roles of the faculty. People don't want to talk about that, but we've got to talk about that. Faculty have to do things differently, and we hope that many of you are faculty here today because you will be the leaders of this kind of change that's going to be needed to say, I can't stand up and teach this reading course in the same way I've taught it for the last 30 years. I've got to use learning communities. I've got to use whatever we can in the technology, whether it's even just guided technology instruction and developmental ed, whether it's drill, it's all the kinds of things that students are going to need to do, but we have to do things differently. So I hope that you all will really reach out to the faculty. If the academic senates aren't meeting on every single campus to talk about what remediation is, what is developmental education, and what is the kind of system we'd like to envision and use. I just went to a conference at Montgomery College in Baltimore County. I think it was Baltimore. Is that the right name? Yes. Community College of Baltimore County, and it was a conference on accelerated learning models. And I brought back the entire syllabus because all these colleges were actually showcasing the research they were involved in and the outcomes they were drawing from the whole variety of practices they were implementing based on the research of this center and Tom Brock Center and others that are really starting to apply the practice in the classroom. And that, I think, historically is where we've had a huge gap. I talk about the achievement gap in K-12 or college, but we also have a learning gap in terms of where the faculty, how the faculty are teaching in today's world and how we're preparing faculty to teach in the ways that are going to, hopefully, on the one hand, help us really reduce the number of students that are underprepared for college level work and increase and shorten the time to degree so that we can increase the graduation statistics and the certificate attainers and the people who are prepared for jobs. I can give you an example from my personal experience. I had one of the largest apprenticeship programs in the country in California, and I remember having 40 slots for electricians. And I remember having several hundred students on the list to take the assessment. And then I remembered only 9 students were prepared to enter in that apprenticeship program. And those were going to be great jobs. There were 40 jobs available, but 31 jobs could not be given to those couple of hundred people on that list because they didn't have, the scientific, the mathematical, and the language literacy skills that they needed to be successful on that assessment and get into a really good paying job. So that's why the work you're doing is so critically important to our future. The president early on asked for us as community colleges to actually see if we could graduate 5 million more students over the next decade. And what that boils down to is the preparation of students has to be increased. And we have to figure out, and it goes back to what Dr. Padron, yells at me all the time and says, we've got to figure out where they're starting and how quickly we can go and where they're finishing to be able to succeed and be retained and progress in college and in life. So, for our part, we're doing a bunch of things. I mean, if you look at the design for Race to the Top, whether it gets funded or not, we're not expecting a budget till next spring probably. We're in an election year. I was asking David Longenecker, what are the lessons learned from being in an election year? And I think the lessons are, stay focused and just wait for it to be over so you can get on with things, and we hope to. But when the president proposed a first in the world competition, and when you look at the $2 billion for the community college trade adjustment program that we put together with the Department of Labor, if you look carefully, there's 3 pages in there that really show you the kind of thinking that we're doing. Can we encourage consortia? Can we have a focus on starting point and end point? And end points are, units required, degrees and certificates earned, and jobs ready for, and jobs actually acquired. And all of you, how many of you are in one of those grants? Can you just raise your hand just to see? Hopefully a lot of you. Because the second competition is coming up right now, and we hope that many more of you will take advantage of that money. The grants go from, $2 to $15 million. So I know that the tribal colleges and universities got their first ever grant. There's a big grant out of LaGuardia Community College here in New York looking at STEM fields and how can we accelerate learning in STEM. All of those grants, many of them, have a developmental education component. And what are they doing in that? Well, they're aligning adult education and college developmental work. There are huge gaps in these systems so that, if you look at, for example, ESL, you may find in an adult ed program that the ESL training goes to, 6th or 7th grade level, and you're starting at 9th grade level at the community college. Well, that work has to get done. And, programs like iBest in Washington State are actually looking at that, coordinating a lot of the what I call siloed funding streams that deal with special populations, community college students, adult basic ed students, and trying to align a system that makes sense. I often talk about with the Department of Labor, the fact that, for example, youth employment funds come out for high school students. But if high school students are behind, where is the community college or the university to actually require in that community with that workforce investment board that kids that get a summer job or an after-school job because they're from low-income families need that job, but they also need to continue their academics, and they should be in a math immersion or a language immersion or a science immersion while they're getting that job. These are young people. These are people that can work 8, 10, 12 hours a day. So they can have the job for 8 hours, but they could have 2 or 3 hours of academics, and we wouldn't have so much catch-up to do. So I'm asking all of you to kind of break the silos down. When you go back in your community colleges and you look at Tom's research and you say, what can we do differently? Is there alignment? And this is a lot of work that has to be done with raising the academic standards in K-12. Is there going to be alignment between the entry level that you expect of college freshmen and how far behind people are, especially in K-12? Our 2020 goal, about a third of the students who would be part of that 5 million from community colleges, that extra 5 million who would be success stories over the next decade would come from K-12. The other 2/3 are people that you have that just leave. And why do they leave? They didn't have the wraparound services that they needed embedded in the education that they're getting in the content. Pushing faculty and working with faculty to figure out, how can we align all the support programs in an institution with the academic instruction students need. Students report, there are lots of studies that are saying now they didn't even know these services existed and they didn't get them early on and they weren't, orientation, I think, you're trying to cram a lot of information. Students don't acquire it in an 8-hour orientation class. They're going to acquire it because the entire institution, like Valencia, I'll just use that, everybody is committed to student learning and success, and every faculty member and every staff member sees themselves as an educator. So we have a long way to go. We're going to take, what money we have. We've got a first in the world competition on the horizon. Actually, the appropriations in the Senate is funding some money to do exactly what, Tom and others are focused on, creating the experiments and the really tested base of evidence to actually apply to practice so that we can say, in our competitions, for example, in our TRIO or Gear Up programs, TRIO is a great example. Here is TRIO and Gear Up are $1 billion, and we've got thousands of institutions getting those funds, and Tom Brock is doing aid like a paycheck and all the performance-based research to say, can we take the dollars we have and really apply them so that more students will succeed? And what is happening in TRIO? They're targeting underserved students from low-income families who we want to succeed. Gear Up is preparing the high school students to come. That's a lot of money. What can we do there to really get more success stories out of these federal funds? So that's why the work you're doing is so important, because we want to take the federal dollars, whether it's existing dollars or new dollars, and apply them to be aligned with the evidence base that you're creating. So, I think at this point, the last comments I want to make are really about not only just the student center reforms, but the technologies that we have to really think differently about using. And I do think we have a gap in the faculty knowledge of using technologies and how institutions are bringing technologies in and where the students are. Because the students are teaching us. I don't know if you agree with that, but many of the students, especially with the social media networks, are way ahead of the game. And you can get lost in the technology, as we all know. You know, students can just get truly, truly lost. And I don't want to get lost in this speech. But, you know, when I look at MITx and I look at Udacity and I get calls from people that these new companies are coming to align the curriculum that they will have, and how is that going to be used by community colleges and universities, and what does it really mean? What I think about is it's an opportunity to really do things differently. And I think, you know, boy, if any of these professors can create, you know, a world-class literacy program out of all this technology that people can use pieces of or the whole thing. And I think, you know, when I look at Tony Breich's work over at Carnegie and I look at Quantway and Mathway and the kinds of things that you're doing to accelerate achievement with high-quality curriculum in consortia, I think that's what we have to think differently about. You know, Maryland won a $1 million completion innovation grant. They're going to redesign 21 courses at historically black colleges and universities. There are lots of groups. Washington State is going to put all of open education in 25 courses, so that will reduce the cost of textbooks, but most importantly, bring together faculty around the curriculum and deans and others of you to really use the best thinking that we can apply. You know, CUNY has a complete redesign for an entire community college that is really focused remediation and focused curriculum. When you step back and look at it, you know, students don't have a choice of everything. Students want more focus and they want more discipline. And really, I think the 60s thought of take anything and do anything is really, we're in a different situation. Virginia College system just redesigned remedial education throughout its 23 courses. Let's see what they do. Reduce remedial math needs by 25,000 students. So they have a targeted goal in Kentucky. That was Kentucky. 6 states are working in achieving the dream at the state level. So we've got a lot. You will continue to have as much support as we can, convince Congress we're really going to make the investments that are worthwhile. But I do think we need to push ourselves on the technology side and also on the quality instruction side. I mean, those are the two pieces that I think, you know, the testing systems, if we can't spend, you know, $300 million in K-12 testing and reduce testing time with new technologies, then I think we will have missed the boat. So I think we need to keep pushing because students want this. They don't want to spend time in tests that don't make sense for them. And we ought to be able to use the analytics to create the kind of testing system that's going to be continuously available. And, you know, we've just got some very old models that need to change. So let me stop there. I think Tom wanted to take a few questions and sort of, you know, just know that we're all at firstname.lastname at ed.gov. And I actually return all my own email because I don't want anything to get lost. And we want to mine everything you're doing. You know, where are the best models? Tell us. You know, Tom, tell us. What are the top 30 models that community colleges would really benefit from that reduce time to the degree and increase success in language arts and mathematics and STEM fields, you know, across the board. A friend deconstructed an anatomy and physiology class and modularized it because they were really concerned that only half the students were going through. You know, can we take those gateway courses to the health sciences profession and completely redesign them? It won't happen in Washington, let me tell you that. But it will happen in every one of your campuses if you work really hard with one another, use the research and apply it, share back the results, and help, as I said, all of us create the democracy and the society we're going to need for the rest of our our lifetimes in any way. And I look back to those 93 million people and I say, we've got to do better this time. So thank you very much, and look forward to the conference and look forward to being available and helpful in all ways that we can. Thanks.
Time for a couple of questions. So, any? Yes. Yes.
Harness the technology that's out there that meets what students are looking for. It's millennial generation. They want to use technology in a certain way.
Yeah, he's asking, how do we harness the technology that students want to use, not waste their time, but be smart about it. And I think there, as I said at the beginning, you're the brain trust. So where is it working well? And I don't think we have the answers to that in a coherent way, but I think we need to really understand, why is it that 5 million students are migrating to the Khan Academy? Because they're, I don't know, when you were in school, I always had like 3 or 4 books for any class, because I always never, the professors, I always wanted to understand it more than one way if I didn't understand it. And the students are using these centers, whether it's the Khan Academy or other kinds of technologies that are available to them to get them what they aren't learning in the classroom. So I think what we need to do is bring those kinds of experts together. And frankly, we are bringing together on October 1, we're going to have an innovation and productivity meeting in Washington, and bring these innovators together to tell us what have they learned and how can we help institutions like yours use what's working. That's the problem. There's a lot of excitement and great ideas, but in terms of an evidence base, we're just at the beginning of this. And, we look to Columbia Teachers College and others to give us the research that says, if you apply the learning sciences in these ways, in these kind of formats, with this kind of pedagogy associated with it, this kind of teaching, then we will have more results and better results for students than just sort of throwing them into something that's not as coordinated. So we are looking very hard at these kinds of things. You're going to see all kinds. You're going to see, I had a line in my speech which I didn't give, which was, many developers see the education marketplace as ripe for the picking. So there's going to be a lot of bad stuff out there. And, really ask you to work in consortia. That's one of the things with the Department of Labor. Learn from each other and figure out, what are the top 10 questions you need to ask these vendors, because we just have not been as sophisticated, and we put a lot of things in place that maybe, aren't working as well. And I'd look to the state of Texas. I mean, they are doing a great job with trying to figure out, some analytics and some systems ways to look at large numbers of students getting, a very personalized My UT center and those kinds of things that will help students, but also giving them feedback on their grades, on their transcripts, on the courses they're taking, on what they need, so it's much more guided than just coming in and signing up for whatever's available. And that's another challenge that we have with the technology, that we're not using it to guide students, and students need the guidance. Students need the guidance. Maybe time for one more question, and then Tom, you're going to give some remarks? Yes. Holyoke Community College, Massachusetts.
When you go back to Washington, if you could tell the financial aid people to sit down with the education people, because the education people, and I count myself among them, are pushing on innovate, and the financial aid people are pushing on clamp down. And it's becoming very difficult on my own campus to push educational innovation during the semesters, because the financial aid people start screaming, "Oh my God, we can't do that," or we can only do that with manual overrides for every single student, which is labor-intensive.
Right. We actually, in the federal government, we actually have an authority for institutions to move into competency-based instruction. And it's actually, that authority was something that spurred the development of Western Governors University in Utah. And, we ask you to take a look at that, because if you're moving to competency-based instruction, there are ways that we can deliver financial aid in that mode. And David Bergeron in my office, who's now the acting Assistant Secretary of Post-Secondary Education that David Longenecker worked with, I kept mentioning David over here because I'm glad to see him, could tell you how to use that. We did a second Pell. Frankly, when we looked at the data, students weren't taking double the number of courses, and they were getting 2 Pells, so we couldn't. It was a $4.5 billion problem, and we had to stop the second Pell. But we have experimental site authority, and so we're doing 8 experiments right now in federal aid, which you could take a look at. That's out on the web. But one of the experiments is giving Pell Grants to students that earned a degree but have been displaced in the workforce and need to come back and retrain for a new career field. So if there are ways that we can use the experimental site authority for the problems that you're having at your institution, we've got to map the federal aid program, and actually we're even thinking, what are the new ideas in federal aid that we ought to be thinking about, and can we use our research authority to really conduct the kinds of experiments, that the 2 Toms are sharing with us pretty much all the time, whether it's developmental education or actually getting, a more performance-based opportunity. We're rulemaking this summer in distance learning and fraud rings. That's going to be our most fun rulemaking. But we have students getting a Pell Grant at one community college and going over to a university and starting over and getting another. And we don't think it's widespread. We know it's not. But we have to have better constraints in place to avoid using those dollars for anything but getting into college and making academic progress. So hopefully we can use the experimental sites authority. The last thing I should mention is I'm going to give Tom some cards to hand out, because we did publish in the Federal Register a call for you to send us those high-impact practices that I mentioned and the research behind them. So we're asking you, tell us what you're doing and tell us the evidence base you used. We are going to put the first 100 of those submissions up pretty soon, and we're hoping to get many, many more. So I'll leave that with Tom and look forward to seeing you all soon. And please let us know what you're doing. What you do really matters to our country. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Undersecretary Kanter. Okay, I'm going to do the most important thing, which is give the thank yous, and then talk a little bit about the background for the conference and go through the structure of the conference a little bit. So get your agenda ready for that. Of course, this is a complex operation to put together. And there are many people who made it possible. So far, it's worked great. So I think I can thank people already. So we had a little planning group that was led by Kathy Hughes. Unfortunately, Kathy's daughter's school has their graduation this morning, so she will be here this afternoon. But she really put this conference together, talked to all the speakers, and arranged that. So I think it was very much her conception and her execution of the conference. So I really need to thank her. She's done a great job. We also had in our little planning group Tom Brock. The other Tom. It's getting a lot of attention this morning. And Tom's great. He had really good ideas about design questions and other types of things. So I think that was wonderful. Sarah Phillips, who's here, who did all of the logistics and the hotels. Many of you probably have dealt with her. This is a great venue that we've had here. All of the food and other types of things. So Sarah has done a wonderful job on that, as she always does. And Kathy and Sarah were helped by Hannah Lahr and Chloe Bellows. So Doug Slater and Betsy Yoon did the publications, and Amy Mazzariella designed the website. If you haven't seen the website and used it, please go to it. It's a wonderful resource. It will be there for a while. All the publications, all the presentations, the bios and everything are there. I had a moment of, or more than a moment of anxiety over the weekend, and I had kind of an undefined concern. I didn't really know what the problem was. And it turns out that there wasn't enough to worry about the conference. I had kind of cleared my schedule for the first 3 days of the week to take care of all of the last minute emergencies that were going to happen. And I didn't have to do anything. I found that I was able to work on other projects. And so I think that really talks about the skill and that this entire group of people have done to put this conference together. So I really appreciate that, and I think we should all acknowledge them as that. So thank you. All right, our center, let's see, let's get going here. Okay, our center is funded by the Department of Education, the Institute for Education Sciences. It was a 5-year center, although it was extended for a 6th year. Our program officer is Katina Stapleton. Is Katina here? Hey, Katina. I just want to say, when this started, my friends called me up and said, you are crazy. You know, that IES program officers are going to make your life miserable. They're going to micromanage. They're going to object to everything. And I want to say that our experience has been absolutely the opposite. Our center actually started out with a significant problem. 3 months after we started, one of our major projects collapsed for reasons I'd be happy to talk to people about. And so, of course, I was worried, what am I going to do, call Katina and tell her about this? And she was really wonderful and very supportive and helped us very much in kind of getting ourselves back on track and going in a somewhat different direction. So I really want to thank Katina for that. And I hope every program officer that I have at that IES or anywhere is as good as Katina. NCPR is a partnership between Teachers College, Community College Research Center, MDRC, the Curry School at the University of Virginia, and some faculty and students at Harvard. I want to say that this has really, for me, been a wonderful experience with this group. I think we've had a great and productive, very collaborative years that we've worked on this center. Really, it was 7 years ago last month when Tom Brock called me up and said, let's put this together. And it's been really one of the most gratifying, I think, experiences I've had in my professional life. So I want to say thank you to all of the team members and all of the organizations. Now you see I'm speaking in the past tense, and if you see the dates on this, NCPR will go out of existence at the end of the month. This is one decision that the IES has made that I disagree with. They did not recompete the center, but nevertheless, I think our work is going to continue. All of us, actually, I've had, as this spring, as we've sort of talked about the end of NCPR, I've had some people come up to me and says, oh, Tom, I didn't realize that CCRC was ending. So I want to assure you that none of the constituent organizations are going to end. Harvard will still be there, so will maybe the University of Virginia will continue to be there. Certainly CCRC and MDRC, and we're doing work that comes directly out of this. So while the center itself is ending, I think that its legacy will continue. Much of what we're doing is really built on that. I just want to say also that a few other we've had some other funders that have been involved with this. The Houston Endowment did provide some funds for our project in Texas. And then other funders that we've had, Hewlett, Kresge, Lumina, have funded projects that are related to this, that have come out of this, that have contributed to this. So I want to thank all of that group. All right. As you know, this is, or many of you know, many of you were here at our conference that was 2 years ago. Actually, Bob Gabriner said something to me when he looked at the agenda, said, well, the conference 2 years ago was about the problem and this is about the solutions. And I didn't quite realize that, but I think that's really what it is. So our conference today is really about the solutions. And reflecting on what's happened in the last 2 years, I think we're really in a very different place than we were 2 years ago. Many things, of course, we all acknowledge that there's still very serious problems, which I'm going to talk about a little bit. But nevertheless, I think there's so many interesting and exciting things that are taking place, many of them done by people in this room. So I think that, I really think that it's you know, as you experience these developments and things, it's very gratifying to see the kind of movement and development that we've had over the last few years. So I think that that we couldn't have had the conference that we're about to have if it had been 2 years ago. And so I do think that 2 years ago was a focusing on the definition of the problem, you know, whereas now I think we're going to really spend 2 days focusing on the solutions. Now I am going, so my job is to spend 5 minutes talking about the problems, reminding you of the problems that we're solving, and so that's what I'm going to do. This is sort of what I consider the, you know, the elevator speech on developmental education, the developmental education basics. We know that a majority of our students are referred to developmental education. Most of them do not complete their sequences. I mean, I think that's something that we have emphasized more and more, that it's not a course in many cases, it's a sequence or an entire curriculum. Many don't finish that. It has not, developmental education as it was taught. Now this is research from a decade ago or from the last decade. So as it was taught in the time we were doing this research was not very effective at improving students, that is, in many cases, especially for students who are at the upper end of the assessments, that is close to the cutoff score. It's not clear that they have benefited from actually being in the remedial classes as opposed to going directly into college. If they went directly into college courses, that's not saying they would have done very well. Many of our students, many of our college-ready students don't do that well either. But nevertheless, I think there's quite a bit of research which has looked at that. We know that the high school community college connection needs to be strengthened. That's certainly one of the reasons why we have so many students in developmental education to begin with. The assessment system needs reform. Short-term focused reforms have modest positive effects and those fade. We're going to talk some about that. And that, you know, in the end, educators now are turning to more ambitious and comprehensive reform. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of the discussion that we've had and the discussion that we will have. Let me talk just a little bit more concretely about some of these research findings and the conference. Many of you have seen this. Actually, I saw somebody at a conference at the Gates conference last week who hadn't seen it. I was surprised. So this is a diagram of what happens to students in developmental education and math who start 3 levels below. And we can see from that, if you look through that 18% of them don't actually show up for the first level. So we're down to 82% who start. 25% of all of those students drop out during the 3rd level. So that certainly suggests a significant issue with what's happening in those classes. So there's an emphasis on that. Another 16% finish the 3rd level but don't show up for the 2nd level, so that we're down to 41% who actually start the 2nd level. And you can continue that through so that we have 16% of these students who in 3 years actually complete their sequence of developmental education. This has been, there are lots of interesting insights from this, but one of it is that we give our students many opportunities to leave, and unfortunately they take those opportunities at a much greater rate. And this type of analysis has really helped provide support for many of the acceleration models that we're talking about here. We have the leaders of the acceleration movement in this room today, so we're looking forward to that discussion. This just shows these are data for 2 and 1 level below, so certainly you're worse off if you start 3 levels below, but there's still problems. And this adds the last column of the people who actually finish the first college level course. So these are the types of data that we've looked at over the last decade that said, you know, really we're not succeeding in getting our students through developmental education into college level courses. We need to improve that. Now, those data don't say anything really about the effectiveness of developmental education. Of course, it could be worse if we didn't have it. And so we've done research, many people also in this room, on trying to understand what the causal effect of developmental education is. And there's several studies now that look at this. We find that mostly there are no or negative effects at the developmental ed cutoff. That is, once again, for the students who are at the upper end. Does not seem to be a positive effect of being in developmental education, and these are studies that were done by Eric Bettinger and Bridget Long, who I think will be here. I'm not sure if they're here. Juan Carlos Calcaño, one of our students, and Bridget did a study in Florida Isaac McFarland and Marta Rell have one in Texas, and then our Judy Scott Clayton and Olga Rodriguez have also done one recently. And all of these basically come to the same conclusion, that at least for the upper level students, there's not a positive effect of developmental education. Now, people have said, well, what about at the lower level? So actually last at our conference, Bridget Long and Angela Boatman presented a paper there which looked at the margin between 2 and 3 levels, or 2 and 1 level below. And the results in this series of studies are somewhat more mixed, but I think basically still not, certainly discouraging. Tatiana Melguiso is here, who's just finishing up a study that she's done in California, and we have some other studies that we've done at CCRC by Amina Dadgar, Michelle Hodara, and Shauna Jaggers, and so you'll hear from them. So that's the basic situation, I think, and I think those are fairly convincing evidence, and I think it sets the stage for what it is that we have to do. At CCRC, we've been thinking about sort of conceptions of developmental education, and this is really something that Judy Scott Clayton has put together. There's sort of 3 things that it can do. One is what we'd like it to do, which is overcome past deficiencies. Another one is, of course, community colleges are open access institutions, but we put students into a long gauntlet of developmental education, and that may discourage them. So in some cases, it's kind of keeping them out of college. Actually, Judy's research suggests that actually that's not as strong an effect that perhaps we thought it might be, but nevertheless, I think that's one issue. And finally, the diversion question, which is really another way to think about this. If students aren't going to get into college level, if we can't use developmental education to put them back on the track with everybody else, maybe we should think about, we have them for a semester or 2, let's make sure that what it is they're getting is going to be useful to them. Now that's controversial, and in some cases, I think there's a lot of interest in certificates or short-term occupational certificates, and the argument is, rather than putting somebody into developmental education where they get lost and they never get to the transfer programs, then perhaps we should give them a focused occupational credential where they'll get a job and aren't getting caught up in developmental education. So that's a controversial. Leaders of those are in this room, and we'll talk about that. One of the integration of college courses, that is co-requisites, or taking developmental students and putting them in college level courses with some type of support. That's something that's attracted a lot of attention, and we'll talk about that. And of course, there's the question of the use of technology, especially for math. So what role does that have? How effective is that? This next session will be about the high school. This is this afternoon. We'll talk about the high school community college connection, another major area of work that we've done at NCPR. Actually, one of the things I'm most respectful, really, of folks in community colleges is how they don't always say, if we just got better students from the high school, we could do a great job. It'd be so easy to say that, and of course we do hear that from time to time. But I think generally people have said, look, these are the students we have, what can we do with those students? I think that's much better than saying, well, we can't do anything, these students are in. And if we're going to work with the high schools, then we should work with the high schools in a way that helps them do that job. So this is really the issues that we're going to address in the second session, the session this afternoon. Developmental education, we've done a study of, dual enrollment. We've done a study of a summer bridge program to try to take students from high school who are testing into developmental and strengthen them over the summer so that they can start on time. So those are some issues that we're looking at. Now, of course, we know that this connection is thwarted by the lack of consensus about what it means to be ready for college. And that's reflected in, I think I would say on the one hand chaos, but very exciting developments that are taking place with assessment. This is a huge issue, and one I think that, as I said, I think is a very, there's a lot of interesting things going on with that. We know there's no consensus. We hope that the Common Core, we know many people here are working on trying to make the Common Core, the assessments that might come out of that, to improve that connection between the institutions. There's no obvious cutoff in the scores that we have now, so that the idea of having these two, I personally find the sort of 2 buckets theory of developmental and college ready doesn't make much sense, especially since we can't really identify who's in that. In any case, there isn't some obvious point where some people won't make it and other people will do. It has weak diagnostic characteristics. We don't know why students are having problems and therefore don't have a good idea about what to do about that. Not much focus on non-cognitive skills. And as research that we've done recently, Judy Scott Clayton and Clive has suggested that there's a significant misplacement or underplacement of students. All right, let me just go to the last session here, which is, if we're discouraged about short-term projects, what do we do? What are the ambitious and more comprehensive reforms that we can talk about? And that's really what we're going to talk about tomorrow morning. And there's several ways of thinking about this. We can take the 200 students in a particular reform in developmental education, and we can try to scale that up to all of the students in our college, or to much more. So there's certainly examples of that. We're going to talk about that. The Developmental Education Initiative, funded by Gates and that works with the Achieving the Dream colleges, is one approach to that. We have some other examples of that. There's an approach of connecting developmental education better to college level programs, rather than simply saying, this is developmental, we're going to reform that, and then what happens afterwards we don't know. So there's a trend to trying to say, let's look at the entire student experience. Several examples: ASAP programs at CUNY, the Completion by Design program that Gates has funded, that's a central aspect of those. Then there's the institution-wide reform. So rather than scaling innovation, we have innovation at scale. We have a complete new community college here at CUNY, so we're going to hear about that. Certainly, this is a fundamental principle of the Completion by Design reform that I just mentioned. And finally, there's comprehensive statewide developmental education redesigns. We'll hear about Virginia, North Carolina as well, and of course there's the famous Connecticut case, which is just in the news, and I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk about the Connecticut. I believe I saw on the list that somebody is here from Connecticut, so I'm sure that if you are, you'll have interested people wanting to talk to you. All right, so that's basically so we have these 3 sessions that we'll talk about. By the way, we are having a lunch with Scott Jasic and Kevin Carey. Kay McClenny will, those are 2 observers of education, and I'm sure Kay will get them to say some interesting things. So that's one thing we'll do. So the way that we've set this up is that this is a research organization, as NCPR. We have the plenaries are essentially presentations of research, and then the breakout sessions are, and there is a breakout session that corresponds to each one of the presentations, and usually, in most cases, those are practitioners, so you can actually go and talk about the specifics that we have been studying. So those breakouts are, the researcher and the practitioner talking about that. We didn't limit ourselves only to those presentations, so in each case there's 1 or 2 additional breakout sessions that are about related things, or things we just felt had to get in, even though we couldn't put them into the plenaries. The descriptions of the breakouts are in the back of your program, as well as their locations, which are downstairs in most cases. Everything is in this building. Anyway, so that's what I have to say. I really look forward to this. I appreciate all of you coming to this. I think that we'll all learn something and we'll be able to move forward. And I hope this will be an excellent ending to the 6 years we've had at NCPR. So thank you very much. Thank again our speakers. And we're going to move right into the next session. While the shuffling around is going, if you can take advantage of our food that's here, if you'd like to do that.